Right. Councillor Creamer, we are on live stream. Thank you. Good morning, colleagues. Apologies for my own late arrival this morning. So if we can start this meeting of the Children and Young People's Committee, and we'll begin with the minutes of the last meeting held on the 13th of December. Everyone that was there happy that these are a true record of that meeting? Yep. Thank you. Apologies for absence this morning.
Thank you, Chairman. So I have the following apologies and substitutions. So Councillor Fole replaces Councillor Callaghan for this meeting. Councillor Creamer replaces Councillor Henry, and Councillor Deakin sends her apologies for health reasons.
We have no substitute for Councillor Deakin this morning. No, thank you.
And no substitution for Councillor Deakin.
No, that's fine, thank you. Obviously, I send best wishes to those who were absent this morning through ill health, and I thank colleagues for subbing where it's been possible. Thank you. I guess you're going to do the work of two this morning, Councillor Meakin. You're going to do the work of two this morning. Right, if we move on, item 3 is declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest by members? No. Any declarations by officers this morning? No. So item 4 is a paper on the development of the children's home provision. There are 3 recommendations on page 11 of your papers, which I move.
I second those, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Do I have any comments, questions or observations on this paper, please? Councillor Meakin, would you like to begin?
Thank you, Chair. If you bear with me, I've not been very well. My blood pressure's a bit up and down, so I'm all right.
Are you comfortable?
Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you at the moment. Yeah, thank you. Just if I suddenly just drop off, I'll be fine. I attended the Finance Committee last week when the package for 4 additional children's homes was put together. One of the homes this council agreed to purchase was on Savile Road in Skegby. The average house price on Savile Road of December 2021 was between 215 and 300,000. This is compared to the average house price of between 125 and 150,000 in Sutton and Ashfield. I appreciate that we need to house vulnerable children in areas where they feel safe. We all heard the comments made by the senior Conservative councillors last year that we need to place children in posher areas so we show how the other half live. Anyone knows that the Children and Young People's Department continually overspending the concern to all levels of this council. It's like you're partying like it's 1999, but the reality is that it's 1984 and the pits have just closed. Savile Close is populated by elderly residents. Yes, there is a nearby primary school, but the nearest secondary school is 2 miles away. There are very few shops. The town centre of Sutton and Ashfield is too far away, and the public transport links are few and far between. For example, the nearest railway station, Sutton Parkway, is an hour's walk away. This is the wrong location at the wrong price. What due diligence do we do to ensure that the locations for our children's homes are bought at the best price, but also located in areas where the infrastructure can support them? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Meakin. Councillor Welsh, you also indicated.
Hi, I was going to say something else, but I'm just going to start by saying something partly in response to what has been said. I spent quite a lot of my younger days working with vulnerable children, including children in care, and I think all of us that have worked in that scenario will know what the situation is. These are the most, if some of the most vulnerable children in the whole of Nottinghamshire, and for many of them have seen or been through the most horrendous time. Whilst I understand what we're saying about being cost effective, the most important thing is finding somewhere safe for them to live and where they can be part of that community. And that community is really, really, really important to those children as they grow up, as they find their feet, as how people support them going forward. And that is about access to facilities, even like parks and playgrounds, but youth services, a shopping high street that they can perhaps walk to, and just being around a community that actually accepts them for what they are, because children in care, not all of them, but very often feel that they've not been accepted and they're not part of something. Community is the most vital part. And I think about buying the house, yes, of course we have to be cost effective, but we also have to think about the bigger picture too. These are our most vulnerable children, and if we can't find them a suitable place to live, then we all may as well just give up and go, because this is what we're here for. So I wasn't aware of those comments about being posh and see now the other half live. I can't make comment on that, but what I will make comment on is that these children should be an absolute priority to us, and that the priority should be decent, good housing in a community that they can be part of and can be accepted as being a part of as well, without everybody saying, not on my doorstep, it's not acceptable. So that's my first point, which obviously I feel quite passionate about. But now I'm going to go on to what I was actually going to say. So I welcome this report, and I welcome the transparency that's in it as well. That's really welcome. I just would like to ask a question with regards to paragraph 13, where you talk about a fourth children's home, where you're talking about doing a joint venture with colleagues from the NHS about mental health expertise to intensively support children. And I apologise if there's any naivety in my question here, but what I would like to know is, the majority of children that go into care have had something that's happened to them that is either not very pleasant, or they've not seen something that's not very pleasant, or there's been a series of events, hasn't there? What do we put in place, and is that still evident now? I know there used to be some counselling that used to take place when they went into care, and that was kind of part of the overall care package. I know that COVID has perhaps had an impact on how that is. So I think this is fabulous that we're doing this, and I think there should be more like this. But what I'd be really interested in what we're doing as the council, full stop, for children with regards to mental health that are in care, and what support we're putting in place, because again, good house, good community, good mental health support, we're setting them off on the right track. Thank you.
Thank you. I've had quite a few hands up. I think Councillor Jackson, did you indicate?
And just to reiterate what I said at the finance meeting, this is about the children and giving them a chance and a good upbringing in life. And the property is an investment. So it's not dead money. It's an investment the council is making, and also investing in the children. There's their future.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. Councillor Barney, you also indicated.
I did, and didn't intend to, but I just felt duty-bound to make some comments. Totally agree with Councillor Welsh and Councillor Jackson. I like Councillor Meakin, and I'm surprised by his comments, particularly this is the first meeting, the first item on the agenda in this new year, and to make political comments and relate the minors and class and wealth structures to these most vulnerable and needy kids who find themselves in these circumstances, I find really quite repulsive and morally repugnant. And I speak so passionately about this just because what matters is that this authority and our officers and us as members put our arms of love and care around each one of these individuals. This is not a party political issue. We're talking about people's lives, people who are in the most destitute, most difficult circumstances, and to toss it into this agenda as the first item of our committee and politicise it and relate it to the minds, I find repulsive. And I'm sorry to get emotional, but it's coming from my involvement with my siblings who have been through the care system and are champions have survived. And I want this authority to stand beside every single individual, every single kid, child, young person that finds themselves thrust into the care and the love of this authority, and to be loved and cared and championed. And the best is what I seek for those children, not the lowest common denominator property value in whatever street, in whatever town. I find those comments disgusting. But I do appreciate Councillor Meakin, and I suspect that that answer was written for him, that he's presented this morning. They're probably not his own views.
Thank you, Councillor Barney and colleagues. I think we can all agree that children are our priority. I will address Councillor Meakin's specific questions when we come to answers. Councillor Girling, you indicated you are obviously not a member of the committee, so as a guest,
Yeah,
of
the reason
course,
I've come, Chairman, is obviously because any purchase of buildings in this authority comes through my committee, Economic Development Asset Management. And I didn't quite catch the quote at the beginning, but I heard something about posh people and seeing what it's like. And I think my name was used. And if it was, it's typically Ashford Independents not talking completely truthful, because that's not what I've said. But if it isn't, if it wasn't directed at me, I can assure you I didn't say that. However, that then takes me on to the property and the fact that it is an investment. You know, property values go up, it is an investment. If ever these properties then become unfit for purpose, or we need bigger properties or need to move the property, we've got something that we can sell. So it's not a case of just chucking money at things. I personally believe that every child in our care deserves the best possible chance. Yeah, and the fact there might not be a shop right next to them, the fact there might not be a school right next to them is exactly the same as any other child in any other area, in any other house, in every other family. They're being treated properly and like everybody else. That's what they want. They don't want to be treated as though they're substandard. They don't want to be treated as though people don't care about them and don't love them and don't want them. We are the corporate parents of these children. We should love them. Not just provide for them, not just do things for them, but we should actually love them. And that's the responsibility of every single council in this authority. Yeah, and in terms of the buildings and the prices and things like that, we do due diligence. We check the prices, we check the house prices. In fact, I was doing that on Friday, where I went to a property to look at the price and have decided it's not good enough for what we want and it's too expensive, so we're not having it. That's what we do. We don't just say, there it is, on a map, we'll have that. Yeah, it's got to be fit for purpose. It's got to do what we want it to do for those children. And I find it, like my colleague, Councillor Barney, quite offensive, actually, that one of the Ashford Independents are putting cost before the love of a child.
Thank you, Councillor Girling. And just to clarify, I did not hear Councillor Meakin suggest that that quote was attributed to you. And looking at him across the chamber as you spoke, I think he is confirming that he did not attribute that
and
critical
then I accept
comment to
that.
you.
My hearing's not at its best always.
No. Thank you. Councillor Fole, I think you indicated. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, sir. Yes, just to join in this, I too found Councillor Meakin's comments actually offensive too. I think it cannot just be about the money. That smacks of NIMBYism of absolutely the worst kind. It's the kind of comment that we get from quite a lot of Ashfield independents. They don't always see the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is caring for the children, as Councillor Welsh and Councillor Barney have just said so passionately. It's really important that we care for these children in the best possible way that we can. And it can't just be about the money. And that's really what was coming across in that message from Councillor Meakin. So I agree with that. Just one thing I would just wonder that it might be helpful, because I'm sure Councillor Meakin's feeling a little bit beleaguered at this stage. I just wonder if one thing that might be helpful for us, and I know this may have come up before, could we, when we've got these new homes listed as improved by policy committee, what is the criteria that is used? And of course, value for money needs to be one, but there are other criteria that for me would actually come well above value for money. It would be about the right community and the right and keeping the children safe and happy and thriving in a particular community. I just wonder if we could see what the criteria was, and then if the members involved in each individual kind of home planning and purchase was actually apprised of actually what was going on and why, then perhaps this kind of rather ignorant approach to actually what children, looked after children, and what the contribution that they might make to a community, and they can make a considerable, very positive contribution towards the community. When I visited a lot of these children's homes way back when I was lead member, and there can be absolutely kind of joy in a community. There really can, and I think that's something that I think that again that we needs to be kind of flagged up. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fole. I'll ask officers to respond in a minute, but in respect to what you said about the criteria, if we look at Appendix 1 of our papers, which is that schedule, sort of gives us a snapshot of what we've got at the minute and what we're looking at. I think it's important to separate out the two aspects of the criterion. What is approved by policy committee here is an agreement in principle to certain proposals or prospects to develop the children's estate. So we have an agreement in principle to develop 6 new homes. That is not to say that each one of those 6 new homes is already identified as site specific, that it's a specific property. So I think there are kind of two stages to assessing what the criterion are. The very early, in principle, is what are the ambitions of this council? What are we trying to do? What, in principle, will Finance Committee allow us to move forward with? And then the second bit is, we think we've identified a property, what criterion are we applying at that point in time? And I think it's probably that second stage, which is the one that's critical to your questioning and thinking. But I will ask officers just to comment, because I think if I distill down most of the conversations, the questioning is really around... certainly from Councillor Welsh, is around what support is offered when children come into care in terms of therapeutic stuff, which again I believe is quite different to the specific project that's outlined in these papers, and how we're looking at homes. I will then wrap up and comment on my own thoughts about where we might or might not have them. Lawrence, is it you that will respond? Thank you.
Yes, I will, if that's all right. If I just start in relation to the property and the specification, it's really important for our looked after children that they are, whenever possible, are placed close to their home communities, so they can continue to attend the schools that they've attended and have links with their parents, wider family and friends. So it's really important that in terms of where homes are situated, that we look at the communities that the young people that we have in care are coming from. The criteria for the homes themselves, even if we're having a home that's for 2 children and needs 2 bedrooms, often that means we need additional space as well as the living space for them, for offices for the staff, sometimes for sleeping rooms for staff as well, depending on the operating model of the home. So the size of the homes, and also the planning considerations, for example, the need for us not to disrupt traffic by having adequate off-road parking, does mean that these are often larger properties, and that's necessary really for the model. They all have to go through a planning process, and so if there are any material planning matters, they have to be dealt with if the home's going to be used, and then they have to be registered by Ofsted and inspected on an ongoing basis in terms of the delivery of those homes, to make sure that it's of the right quality of care for those children. So in terms of those, we are limited actually in Nottinghamshire as to those homes, particularly within the kind of the geographical area that the children are coming into care, which is often disproportionately the west of the county, which means that we do have to search for properties there. So, but as I say, there is due diligence in terms of, we have a process of going through committee, and a series of committees in terms of those permissions. And I think, as already been said, they are standing assets and will be well looked after and well used in terms of the care of the children. If I just turn to the matters around mental health, we have a looked after team, child and adolescent mental health looked after team, who specifically work with all children in care, giving advice to professionals and some support for those children. And they work very closely with wider child and adolescent mental health services as well. So we've got that as the kind of the core of what we do. Within the homes, you might notice that we've put in for the 2 smaller homes a specialist social worker for trauma. And we think actually that we have so many young people coming into to care with specific trauma needs, that actually some specialism to make sure the care plans are of the best quality they can be, because sometimes these young people have very complex and difficult behaviours that are rooted in very severe trauma in early life, and we actually think that we need to put additional work into making sure those care plans can be delivered very best for the most complex presentation of those children. So there's no apology really for suggesting that we need to invest quite heavily in some very specialist expertise directly for that small amount of children if they're going to have good outcomes. The work that we've been doing with health is really around young people who have got very significant behaviours, often self-harming behaviours, or where they might have attempted suicide. And some of those young people will have identified mental illnesses and will need caring in hospital settings. Some of them, they aren't. Their behaviours as a result of severe trauma. But we know that their presentations are such that they could very significantly harm themselves without the right amount of care. And we've got a gap there at the moment in terms of those most complex behaviours. And we're working very, very closely with NHS colleagues to try and pull together a plan that will allow us to house them safely with the right input from both social care and health colleagues to improve their outcomes. Our hope would be that that means that for some young people, they don't need to go into secure units or child and adolescent mental inpatient settings. And for some of them, actually, it means they can come out more quickly. And the hope would be that those young people don't necessarily have to be in care for very long term, but that we can do the right things to make their behaviours manageable by their parents so they can actually go back into families again.
Thank you, Lawrence. Where to begin? Colleagues have obviously articulated their own thoughts, and like Councillor Fowler, I do have a degree of sympathy for Councillor Meakin, because I do think he probably is feeling rather beleaguered and besieged at the moment. I think what might help Councillor Meakin, both your own thinking and your group colleagues' thinking, is to just rebase how you're perceiving children in care and the needs of children in care. So Mr. Jones has already commented that in terms of searching for properties, we do that on the basis of what is required of a home, of a building. And he's explained why that is frequently a larger building with space available for cars because of the number of visiting social workers or support workers. So if we take this from a purely needs-based origin, a property of a certain size will be necessary, a property that offers certain accommodations and outside space, whatever it might be, will be necessary. We're not going to find that on a terraced street with on-street parking. So if we rebase some of our thinking about what are we looking for to start with, also that if the children who are coming into our care are, for argument's sake, Ashfield children, then would you want those children to be living in Bassetlaw, Rushcliffe, Broxtowe, Gedling, if it is possible to have them in a safe home in Ashfield? So I certainly would start by wanting to keep those children as close to home as is possible so that they can maintain all of their support structures. And the only time I would be thinking of doing something different would be if it would actually put the child at more risk of still being in some way accessible or having those contacts. So where ultimately staying close to home is going to be actually detrimental to their care. But beyond that, if the need is in Ashfield or Mansfield or Bassetlaw, that's where I would expect us, as a responsible authority and as responsible corporate parents, to seek to have them in a safe home. So if you start with the functionality of the building and you start with the origins and the needs of the children, that gives you a very clear sense of why perhaps we look for properties in Ashfield and why we look for properties in certain parts of Ashfield, because we're looking for a certain home. It's also, it's a falsehood to say that because it is X 100 yards from the bus stop, the school, the shops, the swimming pool, that children can't access them, that it sort of implies that the children who are in our care are randomly walking the streets trying to access the facilities without any adult support. And the very reason that they're in our care is because they are receiving adult support that they've perhaps not had in their home life to start with. So access to schools and things is a factor of how we're caring for them. And they are just as likely to be in a car going to a swimming lesson with the adult carers as the parents and children of the families who are still together who happen to live on that particular street or housing estate and who need to travel 3 miles to the swimming baths. They are exactly the same. So I think it's really important to start rebasing our thinking. These children are not other. And we've also seemed to have adopted somehow this perception that children in care present some kind of risk to their neighbours. The reason that they're in care is because the adults around them have not cared for them safely. They cannot stay safely. They are not the risk. They have lived at risk. So for me, that would be my plea to you to reshape your thinking and perhaps to try and bring your colleagues with you, because I know we've had similar challenges from colleagues, that the children are where they can be best and most safely cared for. And that's really what we're trying to achieve. So I don't know if that satisfies your question, but if it doesn't, I'm not sure that I can ever convince you. So please start with turning the coin over, looking at it differently, and recognising that collectively that we are doing the very best we can for children in care in Nottinghamshire. So that said, I will just make the point that the paper that's in front of us today, whilst it references homes, the 3 recommendations are all about the staffing that goes with our reshaping of the children's homes portfolio as it is. They're not about buying property. That's not within the gift of this committee to agree. That's Councillor Girling's committee. So you do have the recommendations before you. They have been moved and seconded. Can I take that to the vote? All those in favour, please. Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Meakin. Anyone against? No, that was unanimously carried. Thank you, colleagues. The next item on the agenda is actually foster carers items. I'm not aware that we have any foster carers with us this morning, Mr. Edwards.
There was a foster care liaison group meeting last Monday evening, and there were no foster care questions for committee.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. So item 6 on your papers is the Nottinghamshire School Admission Arrangements 23-24. There is one recommendation on page 17 of your papers, which I move.
Thank you, Chairman. I second those and reserve the right to speak.
Do I have any questions or comments on this paper? No. I think it's healthy, Councillor Meakin, that we can have these debates. It doesn't mean that you're in the sights for the rest of the meeting. Would you like to... Would you like to switch your mic on, Councillor Meakin, and please go ahead with your question?
Thank you, Chair. Right, and here we go. I'm not going to upset anybody now, I don't think. Paragraph 20 of the report states, own admission authority schools are responsible for determining their own admission arrangements. Could you tell us how many schools in the county opt out of the admission arrangements and how their arrangements differ from those determined by the Notts County Council? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take a couple more questions and then I'll have our officers respond. Councillor Lee.
Chairman, thank you very much. I'd just like to welcome this report. It was an in-depth report, actually. I quite enjoyed reading it. The one thing I would ask is, can we make sure, because there are some on this page, that the graphs are in colour? And if they can't be in colour, then don't put them in, because you can't look at them, you can't explain them. And they're not as bad on this pages, because you actually do have the bits at the top that help explain. But on other pages, they're just unhelpful, Chairman. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Point well made. It has been made at previous committees. I think we've probably just forgotten again. So if I could ask officers just to make sure that we get colour copies where appropriate, that would be really helpful. Thank you. Any other questions on this paper? Councillor Welsh.
Yeah, page 56 of 98 4B, where it says about permanent exclusions.
Councillor Welsh, I think you're a report ahead of us.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, yeah, I am.
Do you have any questions on this paper? Thank you, Councillor Welsh. You're fine. That being the case, can I just ask officers to respond to Councillor Meakin's question? Thank you.
For the exact number, I will need to come back to you, but if you consider there are about 170, the number changes quite regularly, 175 maintained schools, and we have above 300, you're talking about 100 plus who are own admission authorities. I would rather commit to sending the exact number on a particular date. Okay, but I think there are now more children attending own admission authorities than maintained schools now. Actually, I think we're at that point. Okay, so this paper is about maintained schools.
Can I just, because of the way Councillor Meakin phrased his question, and he asked about opting out, can I just ask you to clarify as well, some of this notion of own admission is around the fact that the schools are academies rather than maintained, and it doesn't mean that they adopt some random approach. There is a standard approach.
Yeah. Sorry about that. All schools are required to comply with the admissions code. That is no different whether you're an academy, foundation, voluntary aided, whatever. So that's number one. There will be some variations around their oversubscription criterion, and there will be variations around perceptions of catchment, and so on and so forth. But all schools are required to follow the admissions code. So in truth, the variations are quite small, but sometimes detail does matter, particularly in relation to something as school admissions. Okay, I don't think we could give you the minutiae of that, but I can give you the broad numbers and the information we have. Some academies opt to us coordinating their in-year admissions, but that's a small number. That's when parents apply for school places outside of the normal round, but own admission authorities are responsible at the key transfer points. Thank you.
Can I just ask that if you do a written response that you share that with committee members, and if I can just ask those colleagues subbing today, would you rather that came to you as subs or to your original delegates?
So for me, for me as a sub, it'd probably be better with the original delegates, and we can always ask them.
Yeah.
That's fine. So just so we're clear, Marion, thank you very much. Councillor Smith, you reserve the right. Do you have any comments to add?
No, thank you, Chairman.
That being the case, you do have the recommendation before you at page 17. All of those in favour? Anyone against? No, that's unanimously carried. Thank you. Item 7 is a report on children missing education, and this is the 6 monthly update. There are 2 recommendations on pages 50-51 of your papers, which I move.
I second those, Chairman, and again reserve the right to speak.
Right. Councillor Welsh, I suspect this may have been the paper to which you had questions.
Yeah, I'm going to speak to the right report now. Page 56 of the yellow papers 4B. This hasn't actually changed for many, many years, and I'm just wondering what we're doing about this. There's always seems to be a significant rise in permanent exclusions at year 9, and that has happened for a significant amount of time. And it's always a worry to anyone that's worked in education or works around education, because that is such, every year in school is critical, but year 9 is absolutely critical, isn't it? It's just before they go in for their start their GCSE courses, when they're choosing what options are and when they're choosing what educational pathways is best for them. It was a critical time as well for that career support that would perhaps put them on that right pathway as well. Do we know, has there any been work done in Nottinghamshire regarding this? How do we fare nationally with regards to this as well? And is there any plans to do anything with this in the future? How are we working with schools on this? Like I said, I do actually acknowledge this has been a long-term thing with regards to year 9. I've got my own preconceived thoughts from working in education, why that happens in year 9, but I think it would be good to perhaps, and if we've not done a piece of work on it, then perhaps we do need to do a piece of work on it, because this is significant, isn't it, if we're talking about the achievement of young people. So that's my first question. My other question is on page 58, and I was quite surprised at these statistics, given the fact that we've had a pandemic and the amount of time children have actually been in school or has been limited. But if we look at students on reduced timetables or alternative provision, the increase in the summer term thing from 509 to 187, and please excuse my mathematics if it's wrong, is 35.4%. So from 2017-18 to 2021 summer term, we've seen quite a significant increase. So my first question is, do we know why that is? My other questions with regards to reduced timetables and alternative provision, again, because I spent time working in schools, is how confident are we about the quality of alternative provision? And how confident are we with regards to children that are on reduced timetables that they're actually getting that home school support that they need, given especially the current pressures under schools at the moment and the fact that they're short-staffed? So reduced timetables, alternative provision, why has it risen, and then also the rise at year 9 as well. What are we doing about that, if anything at all? And is there more that we can do with regards to a committee with regards to that as well?
Thank you, Councillor Welsh. I'll take some more questions first, just in case there's any overlap. Councillor Creamer, I think you indicated.
Yes. Thank you, Chair. It's on the same subject. So it's page 60, the graph at the top, reduced timetables on 6D. It's pleasing to see there's been some reductions, pardon me, like chronic health issues, but there's some great concern as well about going forward. I mean, the mental health issue, that's increased, but the actual numbers have increased by 63.4%. Pregnant pupils, 66.67%, and school refusal, 111.86%. These are very high percentage numbers, and all the numbers don't always reflect it in direct numbers, for instance, the pregnancy. But it's definitely going in the wrong direction. So what's gone wrong? I'm assuming it's not just COVID. And at the same time, what are we actually doing to actually address these actual figures? Because we've got a mix here of things going right. Are they going right quickly enough, exactly? Like, again, going back to chronic health. But it does concern me that things are actually, particularly in the mental health more than anything else, particularly because of COVID and everything else that's happening at the moment, there are going to be serious issues with mental health throughout the age groups, but particularly with the young, and going back to what Councillor Welsh has said as well, in their more formative years. So it does actually concern me very greatly, more about the physical health, but all the other figures that are going in the wrong direction. Are we putting something in place to actually address it directly?
Thank you, Councillor Creamer. Councillor Meakin, you indicated.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, our children's education was affected during COVID like never before, with children never getting used to homeschooling. Whilst a report like this highlights a small amount of children missing education, it is important to praise the vast majority who attended school. Our children have to adapt as have our heroic teachers and their support staff. This report highlights a particular problem in Bassett Law with a huge percentage more children missing school. This is highlighted at paragraph 4 in the appendix. Is there a specific reason for this, please?
Sorry, I was just indicating that the officer will pick that specific issue up in a moment.
Thank you.
Councillor Lee, you also indicated. And then
Chairman, thank you very much. I was looking at the figures and data late last night, and it just comes to me, and this is the question, is we have seen an increase in year 9. I'm wondering if that's the case because 2 years ago when COVID hit, they would have been the children coming into year 7. They'd have had a major gap in their education where they'd have spent nearly 2 years at home to then come into an education system where they'd have been hitting GCSEs or SATs, as we used to call it, massive stress, but not had that building for the 2-year education. I'm wondering if that's a major element. And then again on COVID, on the on children refusing to come into school. They've had 2 years at home where they haven't had an educational system, where they've realised that they can have an educational system at home. They've seen another option and they're refusing on that case. I'm just wondering how much COVID is actually playing a key part in these figures at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. I suspect that's a different spin on the question that's been raised by others. So when officers address that, I think they'll cover it. Councillor Fole, you...
I've seen a mistake. Sorry, in 4C, I see verbal abuse and threatening twice. Is that a mistake, or is that is there a reason that's been put on twice?
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Fole.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. just a couple of things. On page 56 of 98, but at the very bottom paragraph, there's talk there of the partnerships teams continue to work with schools to find alternatives to exclusion, and a number were withdrawn or reverted as a result of timely intervention. Be really interested to understand that a little bit better. And I know, just credit to staff, this has been such a difficult time. I know there's some fantastic, very creative work going on outside during the pandemic, and I really appreciate that. So a little bit more of an understanding about that, and it's related then, of course, to the one bullet point from the bottom on page 57, when it talked about the number of fixed terms of exclusions impacted by one school. So a bit of understanding of actually of what that kind of looks like in terms of what's going on in schools. The other thing I was going to ask, and apologies, this does actually partly overlap into the next report, but there's reference being made, this is the bullet points in the middle, the bottom one, the educational health and care plans. And I raise this because I was at a conference a while back, and it was reported there that the number of educational health and care plans that are actually satisfactorily finished and kind of signed off nationally is less than 1%. And I'm not suggesting that's the case in Nottinghamshire. I've really no idea, but I just wonder if at this committee if you have already, my apologies, I don't sit on this committee, but if it's actually worthwhile actually seeing how helpful and efficient and how many of these education, health and care plans actually have real significant positive impact, and whether or not they're completed to satisfaction of both the families of children and the professionals who are working with them.
Thank you, Councillor Foll. I think I'll ask Marion in a moment to take the bulk of the questions, and I don't know whether Marion will answer your last point or whether Lawrence will. Our approach to EHCP plans at this council has previously sat in Mr Jones' world, is currently transferring to Marion's world. So one or the other will. I will just add the sheer volumes of EHCP requests nationally do mean that there is a backlog nationally. There are also plans yet to be completed here, which officers will comment on. You certainly made my eyes water when you said less than 1%. I suspect that particular statistic is not correct. I certainly hope officers are going to tell me it's not correct. But officers will explain. If I can ask Marion to begin with the other questions around exclusions and the things collectively that have been raised.
Okay, I think first of all, in relation to permanent exclusions, Nottinghamshire's permanent exclusions remains below that of national. So our partnership work with a very diverse education system is a relative strength. That's number one. I think that the peak with regard to exclusions at year 9, and I would concur from memory, that is quite a peak point, always has been. I think, as Councillor Lee has said, and as you've alluded, COVID has played a part, but I don't think COVID alone. Teenagers, I mean, I taught secondary, so I know that, by year 9, we're beginning to settle teenagers by and large. There is quite a lot of work, I think, nationally done. With regard to looking specifically at the detail, there are other reports that sit underneath this that give even more detail. Nottinghamshire has and does continue to devolve very high amounts of money from the high needs block. Unlike a lot of other authorities where it's centralised, we devolve it to the partnerships, multiple millions of pounds for head teachers, senior leaders to take decisions with regard to what's provided for children at risk of exclusion. A lot of the references in relation, I'm maybe not taking them in the order, but I'll try to link them. When a child does become excluded and not reintegrated into school, they may or may not access alternative provision either on the roll of the school or on, as I call it, our role, EOTAS, educated other than at school. We monitor very closely the attendance and outcomes of the children who we call EOTAS children. We can only compare that data to PRU data. We do not have PRUs, pupil referral units in Nottinghamshire, because of their poor performance, but we do compare the outcomes of our children on alternative provision who are EOTAS with national PRU data, which I don't think is actually in this, and our children perform better. So there is very close scrutiny, monitoring of attendance, a lot of investment in getting children onto courses that result in outcomes for them. But I think, and preparing them often, because by the time we have children in year 9, 10 and 11, a key objective is actually to get them onto the right post-16 course. That is a burning objective. And there, again, that is another relative strength. And that's because of not just the work of the partnership teams, but also the work of schools, which by and large engage. Now, with regard to what we do, there is monitoring of the alternative provisions, there's monitoring of attendance, there's monitoring of outcomes, and that's really very, very operational, but we have that regularly. I see that regularly. And it speaks to the fact that, relatively speaking, our permanent exclusions remain a relative strength. However, these are every child is a child that needs to be in a post-16 pathway. So there's a degree of positivity about the way in which our teams are set up to work with schools. Now, with regard to the reference to Bassett Law, and there is one academy trust in that area which has been and continues to be quite, where exclusions features. What do? We continuously meet and challenge throughout the system. We meet at different levels. We raise concerns at the highest level about that. And we do, and we see at times positive moves forward, but nonetheless, there's no question that there is one academy trust whose exclusions are such that they impact on Nottinghamshire's data as a whole. So that is a concern to officers, and officers raise that through the routes that we have. But we live in the education system is academised. All our secondary schools are academies, with the exception of one, but it is a foundation school, which sometimes adds another layer of complexity. So that's what we do in relation to Bassett Law. In relation to the reference about the percentages, we need to be careful with percentages, and that's why sometimes the numbers are cited as well, because the numbers are relatively small. I mean, if you consider there's 110,000 plus children in statutory school age, we are talking about a very, very small number of children in this report. So we just need to be careful with percentages, and that's why we work on numbers. I think that what our officers would say, and I think broadly members have concurred here, is we have seen a negative impact of the pandemic on children's social and emotional mental health. Schools are increasingly aware of that. On a positive, we've worked in partnership with the city, with the grant, and the Not Alone website was formally launched in November. This is positive, and there's been good feedback. If you've not looked at it, that's worth looking at, because it's not just for children and young people, it's actually for parents and professionals as well. I think what I can say is we are aware, we are working with schools. Schools are increasingly engaging with the mental health training, that every school will have a mental health lead. That is moving forward. Now, I think the two final points are in relation to the number of part-time timetables, and yes, it is something we noted. Now, this would be our observation. We are required to have an oversight of children on part-time timetables, but schools aren't necessarily legally required to share that with us. It's one of these conundrums we have. But almost all of our schools regularly submit that data. We have become quite tenacious over the years about collecting that data. So I would suggest to you that one of the reasons we've seen an increase, and this is a factor, is because we chase it so assiduously, in truth. So that is a factor. Secondly, I think we are seeing, and we monitor, this is an area that we do monitor quite closely, any child who's on a part-time timetable who's also got an EHC plan, that goes straight to officers in the ICDS to review and check and confirm, because there are times where a child may be on a part-time timetable and it may be appropriate. If a child has a child protection plan or a children in need plan, that also goes to social workers, a senior social worker, to confirm and review and check that we are aware and that this remains appropriate. So the relevant colleagues look and check with the officers who are linked to these particular teams. But I think, in fairness, there probably has always been children on part-time timetables, before 2017. Of that, I am absolutely certain. My instinct is it's probably always been in similar numbers, and the truth is they may be increasing, but I would suggest that a significant factor is because they are really chased as well, and I would put the COVID element into that as well. And I think the final question was in relation to EHC plans, and I've got to say that I didn't completely catch the question. I was trying to take hold of, I don't know whether you, Lawrence, caught the question.
I think, did you catch
Did you
differently,
catch,
Lawrence? I think that Councillor Fowle was asking, she correct me, she has heard at a conference or otherwise recently that the numbers of assessments being secured and completed nationally is at a very, very low number. She said less than 1%. That I find difficult to believe. But to understand what our performance is locally, how that sits against nationally and what the issues are, she wants to add something.
So just to say, I think there was a report attached to it, so shall I see if I can find it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It was a bit of research that was done and was presented at a conference that said that people that had completed, the number of children that had successfully completed, that was the words they used, an EHC plan nationally, and I'm not saying that's in Nottinghamshire, was less than 1%.
So if officers could just comment more on how we're handling EHCPs, what sort of the volumes and performance levels are like, how we're doing and how things are going nationally.
I mean, I haven't got the very latest figures to hand for Nottinghamshire. I can say that nationally, the figure that we've had through was that in November, 51% nationally were completed to time scale. So that's the 20-week time scale for the issuing of an EHCP. There's two figures, I guess, that will be of note in Nottinghamshire, which is our average for the year, which I think is still above average. We'd have to get the latest figure, but we were above average. But there are real challenges at the moment, particularly given the volume, which is significantly increased. That's largely because during the pandemic, those children who were already struggling in school have struggled more, and both parents and schools have sometimes lost confidence in meeting those children's needs without an education, health and care plan. And what that means is we've seen a very big increase in the number of parents who are requesting an assessment for a plan. In particular, that's put pressure on our educational psychology services. We've got a brilliant service, but there is a shortage of educational psychologists nationally, and in fact they're on the list of professionals that can actually be recruited from outside the country. It's that bad. So there is a problem in terms of numbers, and you must have an educational psychologist's opinion before you issue an education, health and care plan. That does mean at the moment there is a backlog. We are prioritising a small number of cases, but largely we're trying to deal with them in chronological order, and that is putting pressure in terms of the outcomes in Nottinghamshire. Hopefully the plans, when they're done, will be very good. As I say, we've got very good professionals involved, but there is a delay at the moment. We've recruited as much as we can in terms of additional capacity from private educational psychologists. And in fact, there's been an investment of another £200,000 in this year to increase the capacity that we've got to try and deliver. But I can't pretend there isn't challenges in terms of delivery to timescale. And we're having to communicate very closely with parents who are naturally frustrated by the fact that it's taking longer than it should do in many cases. I say I don't have the latest figure, so I'm loath to go back to one that isn't accurate, but it's perhaps something that we could bring to a future committee or deal with by correspondence outside.
Thank you. And if Councillor Foley is able to actually share the source of the comment, that would probably help inform or contextualise what it is
I'm sure I'd be happy to. I wasn't talking about it issued, and actually I was talking about the final impact and whether or not they've kind of been signed up at the end. That's what I was asking. What was the real impact? Okay, but okay, I'll try and find it. Yeah.
I mean, that is more, and we all know in here the responsibility for children's outcomes, even with an EHC plan, sit at school level. And I mean, it is, I always, when I look very quickly at the Ofsted reports, it is heartening that the majority of our Ofsted reports, regardless of the governance of the school, often make a positive comment about the provision for children with special educational needs. It is always disappointing in contrast when you read the very few when that is not the case. So, I mean, given that the Ofsted make a judgment call on that, and it's recorded in the Ofsted report, but yes, yeah.
And just to satisfy Councillor Lee, is anyone able to comment on page 56 whether the graph which shows verbal abuse / threatening twice is a duplication, or whether perhaps those sentences ought to have been longer and identify two different things?
I think these graphs are in colour when they leave ours. I think it's that's the printing. I just need to check and come back to you. I wouldn't like to say off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you. And just to make the final point, given what Mr Jones has said about educational psychologists and the EHCPs, it is not that this council is simply not resourced enough to do it. It is a shortage of EdPsych resources nationally. That means the resource does not necessarily exist to meet the need. As he says, we have actually increased funding and increased capacity to the extent that we can secure it, but we are certainly not alone as an authority area in finding that there's an overall shortage in that profession. So, that said, sorry, Councillor Smith, you had reserved the right.
Thank you, Chairman. Just want to add a bit of reassurance in terms of Bassett Law, in addition to the work that Marion has highlighted that officers do. Marion also mentioned in her spiel about alternative provision and on-roll, and I know that the particular academy in Bassett Law that's causing us some concern in these figures is looking at creating their own alternative provision site, which will keep those children on roll and allow those children to go to that provision when needed and then access mainstream classes at different times of the day. And I know the County Council is supporting with that. I visited a similar one in my own patch in Newark, and it works really well because the children are contained within the school and everything's the same, but they just access the alternative provision when needed, and it works really well to keep those figures down, as you can see in Newark. So I think we should welcome that piece of work in addition to what Marion set out.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. So that said, can we please move to the vote? The recommendations are on pages 50 and 51. All of those in favour? Thank you, that's unanimously carried. Item 8 is a report on Nottinghamshire's strategy for improving educational opportunities for all. There are 2 recommendations on page 70 which I move.
I second those, Chairman.
And Councillor Welsh, you have a question.
Yeah, it's a very quick question. It's on page 67. First of all, I want to say that I really welcome the report. It was really, really great. So I don't want people to think I'm just getting to my question quickly. But yeah, it's a great report. Some great things going on. And it was actually really interesting to read and I really enjoyed it. I don't think colleagues will be surprised to know that I'm raising this, but page 67 of 98, the bottom line, which says, in recognition of this, the government made a significant amount of funding available to schools aimed at supporting disadvantaged and vulnerable groups. Myself, in my own beliefs, wouldn't necessarily agree with that statement. And in order for us to go forward and support this, we would need some further information as to what you mean with regards to a significant amount of funding and how that actually helped vulnerable and disadvantaged groups of children across Nottinghamshire as well. So whilst I understand there was some additional funding, I do believe, for Mansfield and Ashfield, I think across Nottinghamshire we would agree in all of our areas there are large pockets of deprivation. And what I'm not going to sit here and say is that the government has done nothing, because that's not true. But do I believe that more should be done? Then yes, I do. And that's what I believe, and I would need a little bit of convincing from yourselves with regards to that sentence and why it's in there for the first in the instance. And the other reason that I do have a little bit of an issue with it, without getting, I don't really want to get too political about this, and I'm not going to, but I will say why I feel about this is the free school meals situation during the pandemic. At one point the government were diabolical about it. They were. You know, it took Martin Rashford to stand up and do all of that campaigning to get those free school meals during the school holidays. And then we saw what some of those free school meals were like. And I think even on, you know, on this side of the table, when you saw some of those things that were being delivered to some of our most poorest and disadvantaged children, and then I watch a programme about a woman, not in Nottinghamshire, but elsewhere in the country, that is delivering beds to children because children haven't got beds to sleep on. We didn't have the rollout of the laptops as they should be to disadvantaged children, and that's in my own ward as well. So I have a little issue with this sentence, which I think you, when it was wrote, you thought that that might be the case. I'm not going to go on a massive political rant about it, but I do need convincing, because for me personally, and I have to say, friends that are teachers and head teachers across the country would disagree. A lot, they're my friends, yes, and maybe they may have the same political persuasion as me, but they would disagree with this sentence. So I would need some convincing, and I don't want to vote against this report because the substantive amount of this report we actually agree with and we support, and the most important thing is about children and young people. We do feel passionately about it. But if I put my hand up to this, I think that I'd be going against currently what I believe is happening and as what has happened based on what I've been told and facts. So if I could get some clarity on that, and again, it's not I'm not bashing anyone, like I said. I don't think the government hasn't done nothing at all, because it has done stuff. But I would say it hasn't done enough.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. I'm going to step in at this point, if I can ask you just to switch your mic off. And I'm sure that officers will pick up some of the questioning around the things that this report is about. Separate out the two different things. This report is about Nottinghamshire's strategy for improving educational opportunities for all. So perhaps at some time, if and when we're ever allowed to sit and have lunch or a coffee together, you and I can have a much longer and deeper debate about some of those other philosophical things. In terms of picking up on that sentence, that is in terms of how this council, within its overall strategy for improving outcomes, has used the money that was available from government. It is not for officers of this council to make a case for government, be it blue, red, polka dot, striped, whatever else. So they have made a simplistic statement within here that funding came through. It's for the likes of me and you to debate about whether enough was enough and what will ever be good enough, so we can have that debate somewhere else. I will though just make the point in terms of the free school meals and Marcus Rashford's campaign and the quality of food parcels. This council and this county did not see and was not reported upon in terms of any of those poor, unacceptable substandard food parcels. The scheme that ran in this county area through all of our schools was of a good quality. It was a well-ordered campaign, and those vouchers or food parcels got to the people that needed them, and we were not part of some of those nationally shameful stories which we saw reported on with mouldy fruit and other things. So if your question is about this paper, Councillor Welsh, I'll take it, but I don't want to get into an ideological
It's actually
debate.
just, and I've said that I've not, to be fair. This is a bit of a point of order. You need to look at the wording then of that sentence, because this says, in recognition of this, the government made a significant amount of funding available to schools aimed at supporting At no point does it say schools in Nottinghamshire. At no point does it say schools in Mansfield or Ashfield. It says, on a national perspective, and this is why I have a problem with it, it says, in recognition of this, the government made a significant amount of funding available to schools aimed at supporting disadvantaged and vulnerable groups, which is why I put the wider perspective on it, and which is why I'm concerned about supporting it. So what I asked for, in recognition of what you've put in here, if I can be told why we think a significant amount of funding from the government came to Nottinghamshire and why we think that disadvantaged children in Nottinghamshire had enough during the pandemic to get them through, we will put our hand up to it. But we do need some clarity on that sentence. And that's not being political. It's just saying, can we please have some clarity?
Well, the clarity I would give is that that paragraph reads, national research mirrored in Nottinghamshire schools suggests blah, 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 and in recognition of this. So when I read that paragraph, what I read was that government made funding available nationally, and of that national funding we had some. So I don't think that reads as significant funds to Nottinghamshire. I don't think it's crafted that way, but we get down into semantics and nuance, and again, within the context of this meeting, you and I may never agree, and I may have to forfeit your vote or your group's vote today. I do genuinely think that is semantics within the way that you are reading what is written, so I did not receive that in the same way that you clearly do, but I'd actually like to move the meeting on because your comments are heard. Yeah, I've got some. I think Councillor Meakin, you indicated.
Thank you, Chair. Poor educational outcomes and the lack of social mobility was one of the reasons I became a governor at Malvern Park Primary School in Kirkby. It's clear that child poverty is rising across Nottinghamshire. You've just took a look at the dramatic rise in free school meals claimants across the county. According to the latest figures on free school meal claimants across the county, 1 in 5 children are now claiming free school meals. In March 2020, before successive lockdowns, there was 19,061 free school meal claimants across Nottinghamshire. There are now 22,433, a rise of 3,272 pupils, if my maths are right. Felt more accurately in places like Ashfield and Mansfield. Would you agree with me that the hunger and poverty are the biggest barriers in the education attainment? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Lee, you also indicated, I think.
Chairman, thank you very much. It does get to me sometimes that it feels more like an MP's battling for candidacy than actually fighting for the people of Nottingham. And we're not here to say why we should be MPs or why we should be candidates. We're here for the people that elected us. On the same report of 28, I see the positives in this. The Education Improvement Services have delivered 218 courses and webinars, a positive. I think we need to focus on the positives of what this authority does and what we can do as part of Nottinghamshire Authority, and not concentrate too much on the national beating each other up. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Barney, you also indicated.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. There's a very small paragraph, and I'd like to draw the committee's attention to it because it filled my heart with joy. And that is on page 65, paragraph 15. That indicates that in 2021, 10 of Nottinghamshire's care leavers became graduates, and a total of 36 care leavers are presently in higher education. And I just wanted to dwell on it for a second. I'm sorry, yet again, I'm banging on about my own family, and I know that gets very tiresome. but it resonates with me enormously because of the many kids that have been through my family as foster kids and also adopted children that we've brought into our family. Only 2 have ever actually made it to university, and I know the level of grit and determination and extraordinary self-determination that those 2 members of my family, my sister, who I'm sorry to do this shout out, but ended up going to Preston, studied history, and my brother, who went to Aberdeen and studied medicine and is now a consultant in geriatrics. I know just how much extra determination and strength that they had to have above and beyond. And so for the 10 individuals here, I don't know you, but I do empathise, and I know the committee would want to join with me in giving a huge shout out for that incredible achievement. Well done, guys. That's absolutely brilliant. And also, just a little notice of that somebody's become a midwife with my health scrutiny hat on. Brilliant. Let's have more midwives as well, particularly out of the care system. So just really genuinely a shout out for those achievements, which I don't want to go unmissed. That's awesome.
Thank you, Councillor Barney. And if we could have you at every committee, just to lift us when the mood is getting low, I think that would be a really positive thing for this council also. Councillor Fole.
Yes, thank you. And actually, I agree absolutely. Keep shouting out about it. It's important, isn't it? Because they've made some fantastic progress, which is absolutely wonderful. So I absolutely agree with that. Just 1 or 2 things about impact. Again, I'm on an impact kind of I can't say campaign today. And again, there's some brilliant stuff going on in here, and I know how difficult it is. But if you look, for example, paragraphs 9, 10, and 11, emotional literacy, building relational schools, and further on, and I know Councillor Walsh has made reference to this, it makes reference to Mansfield and Ashfield, and then says that the success of this is already evident. It'd be nice to see some real evidence, wouldn't it? Because that is actually quite descriptive, quite in one sense anecdotal. There's that one really. And again, I think Councillor Walsh made this point, but Mansfield and Ashfield clearly they do need this kind of resource. But you know there are other areas. I mean, certainly kind of in Broxtowe, you know, there's Beeston Central and Eastwood. So you know we need to kind of be careful that actually all children get a good deal out of this that need it, and not just the other ones. And I'm not going to go on about this, but just to say to you, in terms of the paragraph 28 that Michelle's just been talking about, I think the reason why Michelle's passionate about this, why I am too, in terms of support for funding available to schools, there was nowhere near enough. And if you're in and out of schools and you see the kind of impact, I mean, I was talking to a head teacher last week, and he said, Kate, he said, the impact of COVID, particularly on a disadvantaged and vulnerable children, is absolutely awful. He said, we know it's going to be bad, but we're now getting some figures forward, and it is really, really bad. And when you see that happening, to say here that the government's put a significant amount of funding in, perhaps you can understand why that makes us very concerned and actually a little bit angry. I think the point was very well made on poverty. I think that's, again, something else that needs to come into this equation, particularly around disadvantaged and vulnerable children. We need to look at the impact of poverty. I think that should be much more central in some of these reports. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fole. I see that we've got Connie on screen, so I don't know whether Marion or Connie or quite who might want to respond to any questions on this paper.
I won't respond to the political point that's being made. The additional funding was initially for every child for catch-up in 2020 to 21, which I think was about £80 or £85 per child. With regard to the accountability, every single school is required to publish on their website how they are spending that money. So the impact, I mean, this is, Ofsted will hold schools to account for how they have used that intervention funding. That is the system we have. And so for governors and therefore ourselves, because we too monitor Ofsted reports, we will be aware when Ofsted says that the money has not been effectively impactful. So, I mean, where we go, is we go to the school's Ofsted reports, which make judgments about that, and more to the point, the school websites where you should be able to see how they have used it and what the impact of that use is. That should be on every school's website or academy. Thank you for the comments about the work that has been done, because this is done through a partnership with schools, but with other providers as well. And like you, over the years, it has been absolutely heartening to see more of our children, because we like to use that term, our children and young people progressing into higher education. And I certainly know from the reflection of the last 4 years or so, since I've been involved in, since I've had greater involvement in the looked after and care leavers strategy, that we have definitely seen more of our young people going into pathways that lead to employment that will give economic security. And that is the contribution of many. And schools and governors themselves are increasingly taking greater responsibility and insight for our children and young people to be on good career pathways. So thank you for that.
And are you happy that you've fielded everything?
I don't. Connie and I mean,
That's fine.
Yes,
Yeah,
I think so. And I think the other question, obviously, you I think have answered the other questions.
Yes, thank you. So, sorry, Councillor Barney, something to add?
Again on this, just because I think the clarion call that you just raised there again about this point, it is a huge deal, actually, the fact that we're seeing this number of children coming, because it is so extraordinary. And I know in the case of my brother that I already mentioned, and I just highlighted to highlight your point, when he got into do medicine at Aberdeen, this would have been back now, it's some years ago, but probably about 2002, something like that. It was so extraordinary for any child to make it to a degree level course that the BBC Two actually made a short programme about it. And that's how far we've come. We're now not talking about one person in the country.
No.
This is 10 people in one county in 1 year, which is nowhere near enough, but it's absolutely fantastic. And it's also not to decry the kids in care that don't make it into the system as well. Higher education isn't the be-all and end-all, but there is something just so incredible about the tenacity of these kids that do overcome every barrier and challenge and make it, that we just want to champion. So sorry to come back to it, but it is incredible.
Thank you, Councillor Barney. I think I will make the point. I do understand the questions and the challenges that colleagues have raised around the impact of poverty and deprivation, and there are significant areas of poverty and deprivation across this county in specific areas, but not only in Ashfield and Mansfield. There are areas of Newark, there are areas of Bassetlaw, there are areas across the county. So I do not for one moment decry or ignore the very significant challenges that we face in certain areas. I think it is very important to recognise this is a report of this council on our ambitions and approach to our strategy for improving those educational outcomes for all. And the focus and the way that the report is crafted makes it very clear we're identifying 3 key groups here. Those children who are in the care of this local authority, those children who have special educational needs and disabilities, and those children who are eligible for free school meals. Now, that's not to say they are the only ones, but that's the way that this has been shaped, and in terms of our ambitions and our actions, including with partners, to support those needs, that's what's before you today. The recommendations are in terms of our consideration, and I think you have given due consideration to what we're reading. You've put out some challenges, some of which are challenges for us, some of which are challenges I'd love to be able to fix, but are for another place. Now, we may add our voice to challenging whether funding is ever enough and how we would like government to support us, to support our children, but that's a different thing which we cannot directly change, influence or control. So I do ask you to focus on what we are doing, which is what we're reporting on. The recommendation is also to receive an update report in the next 12 months. I would make a couple of other points about work that we've been doing specifically. I mean, Councillor Barney's highlighted particularly very positive work with the looked after children and care leavers work. But I would draw attention to paragraph 37 as an example, and the holiday activities and food programme is something that we have been doing. We were doing through COVID, when there was a lot of focus on it, but something that we continue to do, and that is ongoing work to support families with vulnerable, or to support children and families who are vulnerable or experiencing food poverty and other issues. And that's a programme we should be very rightly proud of as a council, because the fact that it has the reach and impact that it is having is down to the work of the officers of this council in actually rolling it out, including with partners from our districts and boroughs, because this is not universally delivered by us. But there are officers of this council that make sure that they have access to those vulnerable children constantly to support their needs best. So again, I will take us to the vote, if I may. All of those in favour, please. Those against? Any abstentions? Thank you. That one is carried also. Right. I will ask colleagues at this point. Councillor Welsh mentioned on the last one that we were going to get straight to the question, and I know we've had a few long meetings in here and it gets very chilly. So if we can stick to the papers in front of us and not wider ideological issues, that would be really helpful. Number 9 is the establishment of additional posts in the Integrated Children's Disability Service. There are 2 recommendations on page 77, which I move.
Thank you, Chairman. I second those.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Any comments, questions, observations on this paper? Goodness, I really did galvanise responses, didn't I? In which case, I will take that one straight to the vote. All of those in favour? Thank you, that's unanimous. Item 10 is the establishment of additional support worker post in the permanence team. There is 1 recommendation on page 81 of your papers, which I move.
I second that, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Any comments, questions or observations on this paper? Goodness. I should be strict with you more often, shouldn't I? And a lot earlier in the meeting. I'll take us straight to the vote on this one then. Thank you. All of those in favour? Thank you. That was also unanimous. Item 11. This is a paper on the Neurodevelopmental Behavioural Support Service. There are 2 recommendations on page 86, which I move.
And I second those, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Do I have any questions on this one? Councillor Welsh, thank you.
Firstly, definitely welcome this report. I would be interested, without being prejudiced or anything like that, I'd welcome perhaps some information at some point with regards to ADHD and ASD, with regards to permanent and exclusions and what happens in year 9 and whether there is any correlation between that. So that would be my first kind of plea for some more information with regards to that. And my other question relates to, so it's great that we have this once they've been diagnosed. My understanding is at the moment children are waiting about 18 months plus to get a diagnosis for these ADHD and I know that falls under a health kind of umbrella. So I welcome this. I think it's absolutely fantastic. Do we have any information, and are we going to report back in conjunction with health about what's going on with regards to them, to the point that they get actually where they get diagnosed and what actually happens? This is a bit anecdotal from a head teacher, so I apologise if it is just that. But they said one of the frustrations is that when a child does get permanently excluded or temporarily excluded, they would say, as an educational, expert professional, that they believe that child has got ADHD or is perhaps on the autistic spectrum disorder. But the challenge has been getting that diagnosis to get the right support in them so they don't get to the point where they get permanently excluded. And again, I know this has been going on for years, because when I used to work in schools, it was a similar challenge. So I'm just wondering what that pre-early intervention work is, and maybe that's not necessarily something that information that needs to be given today, but can we have that at some point? Because I think that feeds in quite nicely with Marion Clay's report on permanent and exclusions, etc., as well. I'm not saying that they always get permanently excluded. I'm just saying, is that an impact and is that there? But I really, really welcome this, and I'm sure anybody that works in this field would say, can we have more people doing this, because it would make such a huge impact, a massive impact.
Thank you, Councillor Welsh. Do I have any more questions? No. We have two officers with us who have been working on this. Rachel Miller is on screen, and we've got Gary in the chamber. So I don't know if either of you would like to pick up on aspects of Councillor Welsh's questions. Gary?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Gary Eves. I'm the Head of Mental Health, Learning Disability and Children's Commissioning in the Clinical Commissioning Group for Nottingham and Nottinghamshire. So we've worked jointly with council colleagues in developing this. Just picking up on the point around the the diagnostic pathway with paediatricians particularly. So in terms of the entire pathway, the service in scope today looks at the early intervention aspect of that and how we can assess children and young people to identify any modifiable factors that could avoid the medical diagnostic by putting the support in earlier and ruling out a clinical diagnosis there. And that's kind of something that, based on the review that we've done historically around this, is and in line with NICE guidelines, is the right pathway for us to have in place. But we do have the challenges with the waiting times that have been a leading source for us taking this action here, but also then the knock-on effect that has when we have the build-up of young people that are then requiring potentially an assessment with a community paediatrician. So alongside that, we have been working with the two acute trusts in Nottingham and Nottinghamshire, specifically Nottingham University Hospitals and Sherwood Forest Hospitals, to put additional funding into those services on a 2-year basis to address the surge that we will expect when we see this. So we recognise the impact that hopefully resolving some of the challenges that we have here we've thought through that kind of there. Additionally, as part of the Learning Disability and Autism programme for Nottingham and Nottinghamshire, we have received national funding to support around post-diagnostic support. So again, this is not just about children that have been clinically diagnosed and having no support there. So we're working with schools particularly, and the Autism in Schools project specifically to take forward, ensuring that once there has been a diagnosis, there is greater support there, along with wider community support.
Thank you, Gary. Is there anything, Rachel, that you would want to add in terms of our approach or input, or the partnership working proposal?
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. I think it's to offer some reassurance that it is absolutely our hope that in bringing this service into the local authority and in partnership with the CCG, it's our expectation and anticipation that that waiting list will reduce. It won't go down overnight. We're taking on a large challenge, but it's our belief and assessment that the early support part of this neurodevelopmental pathway service really aligns very well to what is already delivered within the family service. So we have a graduated family and parenting offer, which already does offer some support to parents of children with ASD and ADHD. We hope that in bringing this service in, we can expand that, but it also means that those families on the waiting list will hopefully be able to work with them in a different way than perhaps the existing service are able to do. And so it's our hope that that waiting list will come down using the model that we'll deliver it through in the council.
Thank you, Rachel. Sorry, Gary, is something you wanted to add?
I think taking what Rachel shared there and the concerns around the access to clinical diagnostics support there, what we have found in the model that we're trying to replicate from the city is that of the referrals that are received for support, only 61% of those then go on to a medical diagnosis. At the moment, with the current arrangements, 9 in 10 children go through to a medical diagnosis. So what we recognise here is that actually by having that integrated support within early help and wider children's services, we are able to put that support in earlier to avoid then children requiring specialist support where that might not be necessary if we can support earlier.
Councillor Fall.
Thank you. I think this is really interesting, and I think the idea of actually taking things back into County Council seems like a very good and sensible one. And I just wonder if this is a kind of approach, a kind of model that we could perhaps use in some other areas where there are big concerns. I mean, just to throw into the mix, and forgive me if I'm a little bit out of date with this, I'm just wondering about CAMS.
Silence from the officer corps. I think. No, I think there is a discrete separation between council services and health services. I'll ask Lawrence to comment in a minute without putting him on too much of the spot, not about whether we should do it, but I would contend that to an extent we already have a partnership model working, albeit that the CAMS service itself is delivered by healthcare colleagues and not by officers of this council, in the way that he's spoken about some of the EHCP and ICDS things. So I would not want to be saying that we are going to annex the NHS in Nottinghamshire. I think healthcare colleagues and professionals do what they do far better than we. But as far as partnership working goes and strengthening those practices, I think we do some of that, and I would be interested for instance, Lawrence, just to explain how and where those partnerships are used at the moment and what our part is in them. But there are some services. You're not going to be giving me a scalpel and asking me to perform surgery anytime soon, Councillor Fall.
I think probably the best way to describe it, there's a number of decision making and partnership meetings that happen between health colleagues and local authority colleagues, and we've recently set up an executive group which involves both the county city council, the two CCGs, which will become the ICS, and that's specifically around how we work together around issues involving children and families. We've already got some really good examples actually of where we've been doing work around how we jointly commission and deliver services, a range of things. So we mentioned earlier actually around the proposal for a children's home, where we're looking at how we might work together with some young people who've got huge calls on both health and social care. We're doing work around the continuing healthcare framework for children and how we fund what are often very expensive packages for very vulnerable and complex children. So there's a whole range of things that we're looking at, and I think at the moment the relationship and the trust and the ability for us to think more widely than just the very narrow organisational responsibilities and think about how we make the best of what we can do is certainly growing. And myself and Gary and other colleagues meet on a very regular basis to have a look really at scoping out what we can do. So I think we're in a really good place at the moment in terms of having those conversations about not just pleasing organisational boundaries and really thinking in terms of children, family, residents more widely, what we can do together.
Thank you, Lawrence. Does that reassure?
Sounds very promising. I'll leave it at that. Okay.
Yeah. I'm always open to suggestions and opportunities, but as I say, please don't ask me to gown up and go into theatre. Can I just double check one thing that I think hasn't been answered, and it may not be for today, it may need a follow-up, but whether officers feel able to comment on whether they feel that some of those exclusions, be they temporary or permanent, could be avoided or helped if we were getting some early intervention work that perhaps isn't happening. Maybe you'll tell me it is. So I don't know, Rachel, whether you want to comment, or Marion.
It's not data that I'm aware of having access to around that group of excluded young people and whether we know whether or not they are pending a diagnosis. Marion, I don't know if you're able, it's certainly a relevant and interesting question. I've written it down to take away, but I can't have the answer here and now.
And I wouldn't have the answer. I think that's one to take back and discuss in the various group meetings we have.
Thank you both. So you've raised an interesting question there, Councillor Welsh, which we will actually take away and actually test whether it's possible for us to show what might help. Councillor Anderson, you seconded. Did you have anything you wanted to raise or add?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay, that being the case, if I take us to the vote on this one, the recommendations are on page 86. All of those in favour, please. That's unanimous. Thank you, colleagues. Paper 12 is the introduction of Divert Plus and changes to staffing in the Youth Justice Service. There is one recommendation on page 91, which I move.
And I second that, Chair. I also reserve the right to speak on this matter.
Thank you. Any questions, observations, comments on this paper? Can I take Councillor Welsh's question first and then Councillor Anderson? Thank you.
Again, I welcome this report and I think it's really great that this is happening. With regards to what Divert Plus actually is and how it's working, and it mentions in here as well about a successful bid led by the Violence Reduction Unit from the Home Office. It would be really useful to know more about what Divert Plus is, how much we got from the Home Office and how that's working and how that's panning out. Because definitely the more youth workers we have, the better. And I don't think there's anyone here that would disagree with that at all. And the fact that it's an outreach and interventions team is really positive as well. I was just wondering what the scope is with regards to working with Divert Plus in the future and how we feed into that, and how much did we get, how much did Nottinghamshire get from the Home Office, and what is member input in towards that as well, if there's any. I mean, are you yourself involved in what is happening with regards to that programme? Just a bit more information. Again, this doesn't have to be right here and now because I agree with it. I support the report, but I think it would be really useful to know the background information on this and what is happening, because it does seem like it's a really great project, and I think we'd all like to be able to support it better and by knowing more information.
Thank you, Councillor Welsh. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. Given that it is estimated that 80% of children who enter the youth justice system have speech and language challenges, what support, if any, is already being provided to meet these needs? Thank you.
Do I have any other questions before I ask Mr. Edwards to respond?
Rachel's.
Oh, Rachel, you're taking this one too.
Justice in her area.
It worked well that they were both next to each other.
No, that's fine. In that case, if I could ask you to respond to the questions, thank you.
Thank you. So I'm absolutely happy to provide perhaps an extended briefing note around Divert Plus, answering in details some of the questions that have been asked there. In brief, the County Council, and largely that's myself, I'm the head of the Youth Justice Service, alongside my equivalent in the City Council and the Violence Reduction Unit, worked together to put together this bid to the Youth Endowment Fund. I haven't got the number to hand, but I think it's worth around £600,000 or £700,000 over the 3 years of the project. So it was a very successful piece of work, and we were one of only 10 applicants out of something like 200 that received funding. So it really is a fantastic win for Nottinghamshire. What we will have is a team of children's experts, so our youth workers, our youth justice case managers, and some speech and language therapy resource, and I'll come on to that. And we'll have that in 2 small teams dedicated to working inside Mansfield Custody Suite and also the new custody suite in the city. The idea is we see a lot of young people who are arrested, taken into custody and then released. They don't necessarily go on to receive a charge, but what we've recognised is it's an important and quite traumatic event for a young person to be arrested. It's very unusual that there's no reason for that arrest. So although the police may not be able to prove that an offence has been committed, often there will be circumstances surrounding that child that would mean that actually using the arrest as an opportunity to identify a need, work with them to prevent future reoffending. That's kind of the idea of all of this. So as I say, I'll provide an in-depth briefing note which can be shared with members. Coming specifically to Councillor Anderson's point, speech and language therapy has been something that's been very much on the radar for Nottinghamshire's Youth Justice Service for several years. We were lucky enough to be part of an NHS England pilot, which lasted for 18 months and came to an end just under a year ago, where we had an embedded speech and language therapist within the service. This was pilot funding, so we weren't able to continue that. But what that gave us is all of our staff were able to really learn from this speech and language therapist in terms of how we might adapt the way that we work with our young people based on the fact that they're very likely to have some communication needs. We were able to learn about how you might identify a communication need and how you might adapt your support accordingly. As a result of that pilot, we do have some dedicated resource for the Youth Justice Service. It's shared with the looked after young people. So there is a dedicated speech and language therapist based in the head-to-head team that already provides some additional support to our youth justice young people that isn't available perhaps to others. However, what's really fantastic, as part of the Divert Plus pilot, there will be 2 full-time speech and language therapists embedded in that team and available to both undertake assessment with young people in custody and almost more importantly, work with the staff, and that does include the police, that are liaising and communicating with that young person in custody to help get the best outcome. What we really want to achieve is communication with that young person that really helps them understand what is going on, what their choices are, what's going to happen next, because it's something that we recognise it doesn't happen now, that young people with communication difficulties really struggle to understand when adults in that scenario are communicating with them. So yeah, it's really positive news all round.
Thank you, Rachel. Did I have any more questions? No. Was there anything you wanted to add, Mr. Edwards? No. Okay. So it sounds like a really, really positive piece of work. Looking at it, it's 2-year fixed-term contract, and this is to approve 1 extra post. I'm just curious, given that, Rachel, when you would think that we would be able to have some reporting back, 6 months, 1 year, how far through the programme we might look, because that's not within the recommendations at the moment, because this is about creating a post. But clearly, as a piece of work, it's something that's going to be of interest to colleagues to see whether we're having some impact.
So the actual pilot in Nottinghamshire launched in December. Because it's difficult to establish posts quickly within the local authority, we're using some third sector capacity to deliver the youth work aspect at the moment. And so I would say 6 months from now, we should be in a position to bring something back about the progress. I'm happy to suggest that.
Please, that would be well received. So if we can just put that into the work programme going forward, I think that would be really helpful to members' understanding. Recommendation on page 91. All of those in favour, please. Anyone against? No, that was unanimous. Thank you. And the final item today, agenda item 13, is just to receive the work programme. Recommendation is on page 94, which I move.
Thank you, Chairman. I second that with a slight amendment, if I may, that in April we bring forward a paper on sustainability of Nottinghamshire small schools. The team have been doing a lot of work on that in reflection to the North Clifton paper that was at committee in June last year. So I'd like to see that in April, please.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. I don't know that we take it as an amendment as such, but you know, a point well made that this is a report we were expecting to see in the spring. So if you can just make sure that that appears on the next work programme as scheduled, because I understand work is well underway on that. Any other questions on the work programme? No. So if I take us to the vote, can we approve that work programme, please, with that amendment? Thank you. That's unanimously carried. Our business for today is done. Thank you, colleagues, for joining us. Can we close off the live stream, please, Stuart?